Ms. Media, good evening all and welcome. Tonight I have an absolutely chilling collection of middle-of-nowhere stories, and I would like to wish a very happy belated birthday to Michael Bettis. I hope you had a wonderful day, but for now it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. Story 1. About 6 years ago, when back then I happened to be 21, I once possessed one of the most terrifying moments of my life. An experience that still makes my skin crawl whenever I think about it. Ever since back then I happened to be a kid, I have been obsessed with herpetology, the study of reptiles and amphibians, and hunting snakes or herping has always been my favorite thing to do. I live in South Louisiana. It's snake heaven. The swamps near Lake Pontchartrain are packed with all kinds of snakes, and I know every inch of those back roads. That late afternoon back then, I happened to be getting ready for a trip down one of my favorite swamp roads, a stretch that runs through thick, mossy trees and marshy water. The plan was to slowly drive the track and scoop up any snakes crossing before they got hit. But first, I stopped at this old petrol station on the edge of town to fill up. I knew the place had a gloom reputation with violent robberies, drug deals and fights, but it also happened to be the cheapest diesel in the area. And since the sun was still hanging in the sky, I figured it would be okay. Back then, I happened to be halfway through pumping diesel when this beat. Up-late model sedan rolled up beside me. The vehicle gazed like it had been through hell and back with dense rusts, and like it meant trouble. Inside were 4 ruffle-looking guys all staring at me with cold eyes. The driver was a giant individual in his late 20s. He gazed like a linebacker, and he leaned out of his pain with a slow, unsettling grin. I didn't know what they wanted, but the vibe was all wrong. Then the driver mentioned, "Hey, little youngster, I got that morphine." His voice was low, and mocking like he was savoring the chance to intimidate me. Back then, I happened to be small. Yeah, I appeared younger than my age, which I hated, and it felt like he was trying to use that against me. I shook my head hard. "Nah, fellow, I'm good," but he didn't back down. "Come on, little lad. I got a morphine," he mentioned again, each time calling me little lad like it was a joke. That turned out to be like they were trying to wear me down to make me feel small and alarmed in order to buy ew from them. I tried to ignore them, but the words kept coming. Back then, I happened to be done playing nice. "No, I don't want any morphine. Leave me the hell alone." My voice echoed through the empty lot, and a few other customers turned their heads. That was enough. The driver slammed the diesel, tires screeching, and they peeled out. I paid and got the hell out of there. My heart was pounding in my chest as I drove down the lonely swamp track. The place was quiet and isolated with nothing but the sound of bugs and distant water. I stopped where I usually start my search and unload some pillowcases from the pickup bed. Bags full of snakes I'd caught on previous trips. Each bag had a small piece of paper pinned inside with the mile marker where I'd found the snake. I wanted to release them quickly and get back to hunting. One bag held a massive ratnake over 4 ft long, its body thick and powerful, gliding smoothly inside the cloth. As I checked my notes, I suddenly heard the crunch of tires. On gravel behind me, the same beat-up sedan was back. It rolled to a stop right behind my lorry, and my blood ran cold. All 4 men piled out like predators closing in. The driver was easily 260 lb of pure muscle and stormed straight at me. The others fanned out, cutting off my escape. The air felt thick and heavy, charged with menace. "What up, little lad? You don't want this. We're going to see what your little punk ass does now." My legs threatened to buckle. My heart slammed against my ribs. Like a drum, I was frozen, and every instinct screaming in me to dash, but I didn't have the strength to move. I considered the tire iron. I kept it in the lorry, but I knew there was no way I'd get to it in time. Panic clawed up my throat. Desperation forced my hand. I reached into the pillowcase and pulled out the rat snake. The moment it hit the open air, the snake snapped into a tight coil, its head rearing back. It opened its mouth wide, showing off jagged fangs, and let out a terrifying hiss. that seemed to echo through the swamp. The men froze. The sudden aggression caught them off guard. The driver started stepping back, eyes wide, heart pounding too. And then the snake lunged. Its head shot forward, striking just inches from the driver's boot. They screamed, curses ripping from their throats like wild animals. Chaos erupted as they scrambled into their cars. Tires spun, gravel flew, and the old sedan screeched away, nearly ripping the undercarriage clean off when they slammed into the median. I stood rooted to the spot, trembling so hard I thought I'd collapse. The ratnake writhed in my hand, biting gently but firmly and dragging me back from the edge of panic. I breathed hard and ragged, then quickly drove to every release point. I set each snake free, watching them as they vanished into the swampy brush. That late hours, I didn't even try. I went straight home, hunted by the memories of those faces and the danger that back then I happened to be so close to. The snake's hiss still ringing in my ears, and my gratitude for it saving me that day. I live in Wales, North UK. Story 2. It's a place of natural beauty with rolling hills and stone-walled fields. A lot of people come here to admire the beauty of nature, but for a teenage youngster it was mind-numbingly boring. With little else to do, my mates and I spent our evenings exploring the countryside, poking around forgotten buildings and odd corners of nowhere just to kill time. Running parallel to our coast is a long, dull carriageway stretching from Wales into England. Beside it, train tracks snake along the route, sometimes rising over the pathway on small plain cement bridges. That turned out to be near one of these bridges that a friend noticed something odd, a manhole cover almost hidden, nestled beside the tracks. He joked it might lead inside the bridge itself. We were curious and restless, so we came back later, equipped with tools just in case, and carefully unbolted the heavy steel cover. The tracks weren't dangerously close, but close enough that a train driver catching sight of us could report something. And the last thing we wanted was police attention. Once the cover was off, we descended the narrow metal ladder rung by rung, the air growing cooler and damper. At the bottom, we found ourselves in a peculiar narrow passageway, cramped concrete, barely lit by the slivers of moonlight leaking through the grates above. And we decided to make our way to the opposite side, crawling at points, belly scraping cement and heads ducked. That turned out to be tighter than expected, and the deeper in we went, the more the air felt thick and stale. Halfway through, we paused at a vent that opened just slightly onto the motorway below. Watching the headlights pass beneath us was oddly calming, a momentary distraction from the claustrophobia, but it didn't last. Just beyond the halfway point, someone spotted something up ahead, a shape at the far end of the bridge's interior. We hesitated, but curiosity won out. I reached it first, and what I observed burned into my memory. A single fold-up chair faced the wall. Above it, tacked haphazardly, was a torn magazine page, a Madame Nude. The lady's eyes, though, had been meticulously cut out. No one spoke. We stood there staring, each of us frozen in fear. And that's when we found a used Johnny on the ground with blood inside it. That turned out to be at that moment that panic took over. We bolted, tripping, slamming knees and shins against the sharp concrete edges. I remember my palms scraped raw, my breath echoing in the narrow space as we scrambled the ladder, terrified the manhole had been sealed shut in our absence. Thank God it hadn't. We ran and didn't look back. We never noticed who set up the place, who climbs down there with a chair and a mutilated photo and whatever shadows urges led to that used Johnny. I think about it sometimes, especially late at nighttime. We never told anyone. Not the police, not our families. It felt like the kind of thing you don't talk about, like speaking the words out loud, made it more real. But maybe we should have. Something dimness went on down there, and it's not right. Story 3. Back then, I happened to be around 8 years old when this happened. At the time, back then, I happened to be a very nervous kid, shy, anxious, and frightened of just about everything. I once possessed a habit of keeping the lights on at evening, because I used to see a individual standing out of my casement. Looking back, it was likely just my imagination, or maybe hallucination brought on by childhood fear and an overactive imagination. I always told myself it wasn't real, but one evening, something happened that felt different. Back then, I happened to be laying in bed with the lights on as always. At some point, I started to drift off when I felt the edge of the mattress sink slightly, like someone had just sat down. Then I felt a gentle hand stroking my hair. My first thought was that it was one of my parents checking on me, maybe trying to comfort me as I fell asleep. But when I opened my eyes, it wasn't my parents. Sitting on the edge of my bed was a middle-aged guy I once possessed, never seen before. He wasn't spine-chilling, but he was literally glowing, bathed in a soft yellow light. He glanced down at me and smiled. And even though I once possessed, been terrified of everything up until that point in my life, I felt safe. I don't remember what happened after that, just that I fell back asleep almost immediately. A year or two later, back then, I happened to be sitting with my mom as she was reminiscing about her dad, my grandfather, who had died when she was a teenager. We were living abroad at the time, and she had just found a photo she thought had been lost during the move. She handed it to me and remarked, "This is him," and there he was. The individual in the photo was the same glowing figure that I observed sitting in bed that evening. It appeared that there was no doubt in my mind. I didn't say anything to her at the time. For years, I convinced myself it had to have been a dream, a coincidence, or an odd blend of the image from the photo being burnt into my mind after the fact. I didn't trust my memory enough to believe it could be real. But then, years later, at a family gathering, a few of my relatives started sharing their unusual stories, paranormal experiences that they'd had involving my grandfather. Turns out back then, I happened to be the only one he visited. Everyone had a different moment, a different story, but they all described the same thing, a warm, comforting presence. Sometimes just a fleeting vision, sometimes a voice, but always him, always the same smile. So maybe we're all just a little crazy, or maybe Granddad had something to say to each of us before he moved on. Story 4. Back in high school, some companions of mine had access to this old farmhouse in the absolute middle of nowhere, Kansas. That turned out to be dead silent and isolated. You couldn't see another dwelling for miles. The place had been abandoned for years until my friend's parents brought it with plans to renovate and flip it. The thing is, something hated those plans. At first, it was little stuff, things we tried to rationalize. Flashlights turning on inside closed bags. A light switch flipped on just as we were looking to leave. We turned it off, and on our way out, click, it was back on. We tried to laugh it off, told ourselves it was old wiring or faulty switches, the usual excuse, but then it got weirder. One day, we found a noose hanging in the barn next to the dwelling, made from that thick, bright orange plastic weed cutter cord. That turned out to be looped perfectly and dangling from a support beam, plain as day. Disturbing, but we took it down and didn't say much about it. But the next week, it was back up in the same spot. Same cord, same loop. No one admitted to touching. It and the barn had a heavy padlock on it, which only my friend's parents had a key to. Then came the grill incident. We had grilled out back one evening and, like responsible kids, made sure the coals were out, lid closed and everything in order before we left. But when we came back the next weekend, there were charcoal marks scattered across the wooden deck, like someone had dumped the coals and spread them around. The grill lid was still on. Somehow the coals had gotten out, scorched by the wood, yet no fire had started. It's a miracle the whole place didn't go up right then. After that, none of us were comfortable out there. We'd drive all the way just to hang out for a bit, maybe watch some basketball, maybe have a beer, but it always felt off. You could never fully relax. Even if nothing was happening, the air was tense and heavy. We never got drunk, never stayed too late, and always had a designated driver. Then the torch incident happened. One of the guys tossed his bag onto the floor, and from inside it, his torch started blinking on and off. No one was touching it. That turned out to be zipped up. We opened the bag and it stopped, closed it. It started again. That was it for me. I never went back. A few months later, the home caught fire and burnt to the ground before renovations were finished. Thankfully, no one was hurt. They declared it could have been bad wiring, but after everything that happened, none of us really bought it. Part of me thinks whatever was in that dwelling, whatever had been pissed off from the moment renovation started, didn't want it changed and didn't want people in it. And when subtle didn't work, they made sure we got the message. And in the end, they made sure no one would ever return. Story 5. I live in Ontario, Canada, which has amazing forests and quiet parks, if you know where to look. My father lives in a very small town with a population of just under 1,000 people. Seriously, they have one grocery store, restaurants, and diesel station combos all in the same building. My dad is a park ranger, one of the only ones out there whose job it is to look for any illegal activity, fires, mountain lions or bears, and just to keep the grove clean. I do not live with my dad, but every few months I make a trip up to see him, which usually ends up becoming a trek through nature. On one of these trips a while ago, he took me out on the water in a canoe and went out for the day. I don't remember what the lake was called, but it was a large lake with tall rock faces and cliffs on one side with big spruce trees overhead on the very tops. This lake was not one of the populated ones, meaning that no one lived on it or really visited it, because in order to get to it, you have to wander on foot as there were no roads leading to it. As we're paddling along, we come across the opening to a ravine cut into the side of the cliff. The water ran straight into it like a river, and it just continued straight for a good long while, enclosed on either side until it opened up further down at the end. Because of how my dad is, he thought it would be cool to paddle down and see where it went. It wasn't very narrow, but it was enclosed and tight enough to give me a slight feeling of claustrophobia, which never got better because the channel was so damn long. At the end, it opened up into a boggy, swamp-like area that was mostly enclosed on all sides by high rock walls, not quite as tall as the ones we had just come through, but still tall. Off to our right, there was a part of the rock wall that we were able to get out a stride along that led to a pretty large flat area of rock ledge tucked away under a tree with big overhanging branches. I remember thinking that if it wasn't so unsettling, it would be a great place to camp, which other people thought of too, considering there were already the remains of a campsite there. I don't know what happened to this campsite, or why the people camping there before had left it in such bad condition before completely abandoning it, but this camp was trashed. It appeared that there was a fire pit and charred wood had been thrown everywhere. It appeared that there was a huge mark of black on one of the rock walls where charred logs had been thrown at it, basically exploding upon impact. It appeared that there wasn't a tent, but there was a lot of clothing and things you wouldn't really want to leave behind if you were packing, like perfectly good shoes and even a metal cooler. I remember walking over to the edge and gazed down into the water below. That turned out to be probably a good 15 to 20 a drop. I remember looking down and seeing one of those folding camp chairs at the bottom of the ravine, completely underwater, the ones with the strips of fabric interlocking to make a kind of grid pattern. It appeared that there was nothing wrong with it. That turned out to be just there. It made me nervous to look at it because I thought I might fall in like the chair. Eventually, we got back into the canoe and my dad paddled us into the swampy area, which was very shallow and full of dead wooden logs, meaning that eventually he was using his paddle to basically pull us along instead of paddling because there just wasn't enough water. Eventually, though, he pulled us over to the other side where there was more water, and we spent a few minutes moving along the edge, my dad pointing out some cool insects that were living on the rocks. And as we passed by this copse of fallen trees, I vividly remember seeing a totem pole under the water. It didn't have any color on it, so I almost didn't see it, but it was carved. and I could make out the faces on the totem, and the individual made shape in this long, yellowy white pole. I don't remember if my dad had any reaction to it, because I didn't point it out to him, because at this point in my life, I didn't actually know what it was. I did find out later and can uncomfortably say it was lying abandoned in the middle of the swamp, in the middle of nowhere. But this collection of encounters left me feeling quite unsettled. Why did those people leave their things? What was going on out there in the middle of nowhere? Story 6. I grew up miles from the nearest neighborhood, surrounded by farms, barns, and tree lines that seemed to stretch out forever. In high school, I once possessed this habit of messing with my pals when they came over at evening. I'd hide somewhere on the property, forcing them to wander around in the gloom, exploring barns or weaving between the machinery and trees until they found me. My parents even got in on it. If anyone came to the residence to ask where back then I happened to be, they'd just say, "Too bad, you'll have to find her." Well, one evening a friend was already at my place, and we were waiting for another guy to show up. The gravel on our long driveway crunched under his tires as he pulled in, and the second we noticed his headlights, we went off running. I observed my friend dart into one of the outbuildings and made for the trees at the edge of the property. I found a low cluster of bushes and crouched down, trying to keep my breath quiet. The air smelled faintly of hay and damp earth, but also something metallic like old rust. I remember grinning to myself, waiting for the moment when I'd hear my friend's footsteps search for me. But instead, I heard breathing. Not the short, quiet breaths of someone hiding, but slow, steady, deliberate inhalations. That turned out to be so close I could almost feel it in the air between the leaves. That turned out to be an animal. That turned out to be human. A peculiar cold pressure settled in my chest. I stayed frozen for maybe 5 seconds, my brain flipping between wanting to believe it was my friend and knowing deep down that it wasn't. Finally, survival won out. I burst from the bushes and made a straight line for the driveway, forcing myself to act like I'd just gotten bored of hiding. For the rest of the late hours, I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever had been breathing was still out there watching. Every sound seemed louder. Every shadow seemed to move. Sometime after midnight, my dad went outside because he thought he heard something. He didn't see anything and came back in, but in the morning, he found one of our cows dead in the pasture. It had been killed and butchered right there and pieces of it taken out. I've never been able to stop thinking about how close that breathing had been to me and how quiet the rest of the nighttime was after it stopped. I wonder if they noticed me or knew back then I happened to be there, and what would have happened to me had they decided to do something malicious to me instead of the cow. For all I know, that cow could have very well stayed alive and had a good life while I perished, unknown to my family. Story 7. We were deep in the Gamma Ranges, out in the South Australian semi-arid desert, about as far from civilization as you can get without falling off the map completely. The land out there is scorched and raw, like it's barely tolerated human presence. We were a small research team, dropping water catches for longer treks we'd planned through the interior. There's no portable water out there, no shade, and if something goes wrong, your best shot was a satellite call to base, followed by an 8-hour wait for a chopper. That's if they could even find you. We'd been doing drops for 3 days. Spinifex grass, which is spiky, sun-hardened stuff and hurts like hell, was everywhere. One of the guys, Joel, tripped and landed in a whole bush of it. We had to help him pick up the little grass like little spines for hours. He peered like a human pincushion, but he laughed it off. The outback has a way of making you giddy, like the sun cooks part of your brain. We weren't laughing, though, when the orb weavers started showing up. They were everywhere. Big fat ones with thick legs, and webs as strong as fishing line. You couldn't wander 50 meters without walking face through a web. After the second time, I gagged a mouthful of silk, and we started carrying sticks in front of us like blind men, sweeping the path ahead of us to avoid being caught. They hung from low branches from our tents, sometimes from our backpacks if we stood still too long. By day 4, we were getting low on supplies and eager to reach the last drop. The area was steep and remote. We'd only managed to find one map that even showed the peak and water drop site. That turned out to be a mess, water-stained, half-faded like someone had left it in a billy can. But it showed what appeared like a straightforward descent from the peak to the valley below. We followed it, which was a big mistake. The path led to what must have once been a waterfall, now long dry and bleached white by the sun. The drop was sheer, 300 FT down, and straight to a basin of jagged rocks and dried clay with no slope. We just stood in silence, wind howling up the canyon. Joel knelt to tie his bootlace, and that's when we noticed it. A brown snake slid right past his leg. Not a sound from him, but I could see the color drain from his face. One bite from that thing and you're gone before the chopper even starts the flight. We watched it disappear, and none of us moved until the last rattle of grass died out. We debated doubling back, finding another descent. But then something bizarre happened. We'd hear rocks falling behind us even when we were standing still, small ones like footsteps, a stick snapping just out of sight. Once I thought I observed someone crouching between the bushes below the cliffside, but when I raised my binoculars, there was nothing. The air felt heavy and charged like before a thunderstorm. Joel, who'd been unusually quiet since the snake, suddenly grabbed my arm and pointed to the map. "This part here, it looks wrong." He ran a grimy finger along the ridgeline that didn't seem to match our surroundings anymore. "That track we came down, it's not on the map. And this bit here, that's not cetographic. That turned out to be a symbol, but not one I'd seen before. A circle inside of a triangle with 3 prongs extended from the top, like antlers. Glanced more like a cave art than anything. I questioned him where he spotted it before, but he didn't answer. Folded the map up and refused to hold it again. That nighttime we camped on the ridge. We should have been back at the vehicle, but wood rooting had burned too much daylight. We sat up as best we could and tried to eat, but none of us had much of an appetite. And that's when it really started. Around midnight, we heard something moving through the brush, heavy and deliberate. Not wind, not an animal. Something that stopped when we spoke and started again when we went quiet. Then came the whispering that didn't sound like English. More murmuring voices layered over each other just at the edge of comprehension. One of us pissed himself and curled up in his swag. When morning came, everyone was silent. Even the orb weavers were gone. We packed off, got off the ridge as fast as we could, abandoning the latest water drop. And we didn't speak until we were back near our vehicle, dust-covered, dehydrated and rattled. We never found that map again. Joel swore he folded it up and put it in his side pocket. But when he went to pull it out, there was nothing there. We haven't got back to that section of range, but sometimes I still dream of the cliff and the strange symbol. If you ever head into Gam ranges, it's beautiful. Just be careful out there. Story 8. I used to work in a remote protected wilderness area deep up north, somewhere between the provincial backcountry preserves and lakes you only ever reach by paddle and portage. It's beautiful and untouched. Well, one autumn evening I decided to take a solo paddle after finishing my shift. The conditions were unreal. No wind, stars sharp as needles, and water like a polished black glass. That turned out to be an evening that was eerily quiet. I couldn't hear any bugs making noises or the occasional bird, just the rhythmic sound of my paddle and the soft scrape of the canoe gliding forwards. Around midnight, I spotted a small island which I didn't recognize. That turned out to be marked on my map, but gazed like a good spot to crash. That turned out to be flat, dry, and quiet. So I landed, dragged my gear up past the treine, and set up my tent in the shadows and went straight to sleep without exploring. I woke up just after sunrise, unzipped the tent, and stepped out. When I stretched, I noticed that maybe 30 FT from where I camped, just beyond a small rise, was a mound roughly 3 FT wide and 6 FT long, made entirely of bones, stacked and weathered, but clearly deliberate. There were no plants growing on it, no moss, just a clean shape that peered wrong in an otherwise untouched timberland in the middle of nowhere. Long animal bones arranged, not scattered like a predator's kill, not picked over, just placed clean and bleached. I couldn't figure out why I once possessed and noticed it the nighttime before. I must have walked right past it to get to my tent. That turned out to be 3 feet tall. I got this overwhelming feeling like back then I happened to be being watched, but not by anything visible. Like the trees were leaning in, the silence itself was listening. I spent years in the back country and don't scare easy, but every instinct I once possessed told me I once possessed made a mistake by staying there. I packed up fast, skipped breakfast. I just put all my gear in the canoe and left. I've thought about them a lot since. What the mound was, who put it there, and why the bones were so clean, and the fact the island isn't on any map. I've come here since then a number of times, but one thing that I've always found peculiar is I've never been able to find the map after, despite paddling the same route dozens of times. Like, it was never really there. It only shows up when it wants to. Maybe I just got lost in the evening. What are your thoughts? Story 9. Back then, I happened to be out solo hiking in the Blackstone Range the other weekend. Back then, I happened to be planning to summon Mount Calm via the Ridgewalker Trail. Typical mountain weather, fog, wind, and a bit of rain rolling in. The whole range was completely soaked in. Visibility was maybe a few inches ahead of me at best. After pushing on for a bit and realizing I couldn't see squat, I decided to double back to Gray's Spire Shelter to figure out a new plan. I ended up deciding to hike up to Mount Darnell instead and take the hollow path ridge down the backside to get to my sedan. Sounded like a decent detour at the time. Now, if you've ever been on Hollow Path, you'll know it's basically just a bunch of granite boulders stacked on top of each other, sketchy even in good weather. But in that fog, and with everything wet, super slick, and no one else was out there that day. Back then, I happened to be picking my way down really carefully, trying not to wipe out, and of course the thoughts start creeping in. If I twist an ankle or fall face first onto a rock, I'm totally screwed. There's no one around, and with the fog, no one will even know where to look. So, I'm slowly making my way, trying to keep my nerves in check, when I see this huge black shape up ahead through a gap in the fog, about 150 FT or so down the trail. It peered. Solid, definitely animal-shaped, and my brain immediately goes bare. My heart's pounding and I freeze. The fog rolls back in and I can't see anymore, trying to peer through it, half hoping I imagined it. I move a little closer, shouting at it, but get nothing. Then I get close enough, and finally I realize it's a damned tree stump. Big, black, upturned, but yes, a tree stump. So I stood there laughing and swearing at myself because for 2 solid minutes, back then, I happened to be convinced. Back then, I happened to be about to have a bear encounter. The fog and adrenaline combo really messed with my head. I sat down to collect myself and ended up getting harassed by a very angry marmot who apparently lived nearby and didn't appreciate me chilling near its den. Lesson learned: don't trust your brain too much when you're cold, wet, and stressed. Oh, and tree stumps are jerks. Story 10. One summer nighttime, my buddy and I were fishing for catfish. That turned out to be a still humid evening with the only sounds being water and bugs. We stayed out late, packing up just after midnight. The stride back to our automobile was about a mile through an open field with no lights, no paths, and just all grass and treeine in the distance. We flipped on our flashlights, and as we started walking, that's when we noticed them. Eyes, dozens of tiny glowing eyes low to the ground, stretched out in a wide semicircle ahead of us, all at once, like they were already there, waiting. We froze. It took a moment to realize they weren't lights. They were eyes reflecting our beams, and they weren't moving. They were watching us. We didn't say much, just gave each other a look and kept walking towards the cars, which were in the same direction as them. Every few steps, we'd scan the lights with our beams, and they were always in the same position, always staring. Then maybe 50 yards closer, they all moved. Not at us, but as one, turning and running in all directions. The grass around us rippled, and we could hear paws pounding through the shadows. That's when we realized we walked straight into a massive pack of coyotes. They'd been all around us, just outside the beam of our lights, silently tracking our movement as we walked. They could have flanked us, rushed us, and we would have never seen them coming. It didn't feel like some majestic wildlife encounter. It felt like we could have been their prey, and we didn't stop until we were inside the automobile with the doors locked. If they hadn't scattered, if just one of them had made a different call, this could have been a very different story. Story 11. It's the middle of February in northern Canada. It's about 6 p.m., which means it's pitch black outside. We're wrapping up for the day. I have a slip tank of diesel in the back of my pickup that I'm filling up with the side broom on the end of the pipeline. I sent the other guys down to the other end to help with the other stuff there. For some reason, I keep on getting this strange feeling. The diesel pump is very loud, so I turn it off and listen quietly. Nothing. I go back to filling up the tank, but can't shake this feeling, and I look around. Something's not right. I turn the pump off and get back into the pickup and just laugh at where I am, 28 years old, afraid of the gloom. As I start to turn the pickup headlights, I catch two bright eyes on top of a pile of dirt to the side of what we've moved for the pipeline. On top of that pile is a giant cougar. It had just been staring me down the entire time, debating or not. Back then, I happened to be going to dinner, and faster than you can blink, it jumps off the pile and I lose it in the darkness. And when we come back the next day, I go look for traps, and I didn't touch ground for a good 30 FT off that dirt pile. I still get shivers thinking about it, watching me the entire time. I'm still afraid of the shadows, but I think there's good reason. Story 12. Back then, I happened to be camping solo for a late hours in a remote part of Blackroot Valley, a quiet spot tucked off a dirt pathway in the northern high country. My sister, who I was traveling with at the time, had stayed behind at a nearby ranch she used to work at. So it was just me, the open stars, and my old dog. The evening started out perfectly. Clear skies, crisp air, and total silence except for the wind moving through the pines. I pitched my tent in a small clearing just before dusk and hiked around a little with my dog, then settled in early. Sometime deep into the nighttime, I woke up to her growling low in her throat. Then a sudden jarring movement. She placed herself over me, straddling my body inside the tent. 4 paws planted firmly on either side of my sleeping bag and erupted. She barked like she had never barked before. That turned out to be not playful, and it wasn't a warning. This was aggressive, urgent barking. And then I smelled it, a stench so thick and rotten it coated the inside of my mouth like death soaked in garbage and copper. I've smelled the corpses of animals before in various stages of decay, but this was worse than all of them. I couldn't move. You always imagine your lack in that moment, like make echo, bang pots, yell. But lying there in the dimness in Grizzly County, knowing back then I happened to be alone and that something was right outside the tent. Back then, I happened to be paralyzed. My hands wouldn't even cooperate to unzip the bag, and she kept barking and didn't move off me. She was ready to fight if it came to that. I don't know what was out there. I didn't hear breathing or steps or brush snapping, just the smell and her absolute fury. Eventually, it faded. Her barking slowed, and she finally sat next to me, still alert and eyes fixed on the tent wall. I didn't sleep for the rest of the late hours. In the morning, there were no prints, nothing disturbed, but I didn't waste time in packing up. I once stored food in the tent, but I once cooked in the vestibule once or twice. Back east in Black Bear country, where the stakes are different. That tent still held the scent of old meals, and I didn't even think about it. To this day, I'm pretty sure the dog saved my life. She passed a few years later, and whenever someone tells me animals don't know more than we do, I remember that nighttime and the way she stood over me like a shield. Story 13. I used to work as a field geologist in the Australian outback, about 12 hours north of Adelaide. Out there you can go days without seeing another human being. It's just you, the hauler, and the horizon that never seems to get any closer. One afternoon, back then, I happened to be driving between survey points when I spotted something odd in the distance, something tall and thin, sticking straight up from the ground. My first thought was that it was a fence post or maybe a flagpole, but there were no farms and no homesteads, nothing for miles in any direction. Curiosity got the better of me, so I detoured across the dusty, sun-baked scrub to take a closer look. When I got close enough, my stomach dropped. It wasn't a pole at all. That turned out to be a metal spike, and impaled on it from hindquarters to mouth was the rotting carcass of a dog. The body was already decayed, skin leathery and pulled tight, but the shape was unmistakable. That turned out to be the kind of thing you don't process right away, and my brain kept trying to make it into something else. A prank, an odd sculpture, anything other than what it actually was. But there it was, swaying slightly in the hot wind. I took some pictures, called my boss, and he contacted the police. They remarked they'd check it out, but I never heard anything back. For the rest of the assignment, I couldn't shake the thought that someone had done that deliberately. Someone with the time, the isolation and cruelty to set up something like that in the middle of nowhere. And if they are out there once, they could still be there again. Outro. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed tonight's stories. I'm sorry this video was a bit shorter. I did have 13 stories, but they just turned out to be not as long as I expected. So, there you go. If you liked it, be sure to let me know down below. I would also like to give a huge thank you to my members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen. Your support really is invaluable, so thank you. Would you believe that we're going to be celebrating 10 years of the channel in a month's time? So I'm getting together a few ideas of what to do to celebrate. If you have any ideas, please drop them in the comments, and maybe I can make it happen. I think I'm going to start doing them in early October, so it's going to be good. I hope you join me. Until next time though, mates, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one. Good evening. All from Mortis Media Ghost Stories.